She gave a broken child back her laughter, but one whispered sentence threatened to shatter it all. When a millionaire overheard his glamorous fiancée telling the nanny, "You don't belong in this family," his next move stunned everyone and changed their lives. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Elena Rivera adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag as she stepped through the towering wrought iron gates of the Hale estate. The mansion loomed before her, with its tall stone pillars and sprawling gardens, a place she had only ever seen in glossy magazines. For a moment she paused, her breath catching at the sight of wealth and grandeur that seemed worlds away from her own modest upbringing. Yet her heart wasn't beating with awe, it was pounding with purpose. She had come here for Lila, a little girl she had yet to meet but already felt bound to by quiet determination. Inside, the halls gleamed with polished marble and crystal chandeliers. The staff moved silently, professional and efficient, their eyes briefly flicking toward her, as though to measure how long she would last. She knew the reputation. No nanny had managed to stay more than a few months with the Hale family. The grief of a motherless child was a storm most had grown up weathering many of her own. She adjusted her blouse, smoothed her skirt, and let her soft smile settle across her face as a kind of armor. She found Lila in a sunlit playroom, surrounded by toys that looked untouched, stacked neatly on shelves like museum pieces rather than companions for a child. Lila sat on the floor clutching a small stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide and distant. Her dark curls framed a delicate face that seemed older than her 5 years, shadowed by a quiet sorrow. Elena's heart clenched at the sight. She lowered herself gently onto the carpet, leaving a safe distance between them. "Hello, Lila," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth like sunlight through a cold window. "My name is Alega. Your father asked me to be here, to spend time with you. I like stories, and I can braid hair, and sometimes I even sing songs badly enough to make people laugh. But we can do whatever you like, even if that's just sitting here with your rabbit." For a long moment, silence lingered, broken only by the sound of the clock ticking on the far wall. Lila's fingers tightened around the stuffed rabbit's ears. Elena did not push. She simply sat, her presence calm and patient. Eventually, Lila's small voice slipped out, fragile but clear. "His name is Mr. Buttons." Elena's smile deepened. "Mr. Buttons is a very fine name. May I shake his paw?" She extended a hand toward the rabbit, not toward Lila, respecting the boundary the child seemed to need. Slowly, cautiously, Lila nudged the rabbit forward and allowed Elena to take its paw between her fingers. Elena gave it a solemn shake. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Buttons." That was the first crack in the wall. Over the days that followed, the cracks widened. Elena brought gentle routines into the house, guiding Lila into laughter by making silly animal voices when reading bedtime stories, or whispering small encouragements when the girl tried to speak in longer sentences. At mealtimes, Elena sometimes pretended her own stomach was too full, so Lila would eat more without hesitation. At night, when the mansion's lights dimmed and the halls fell silent, Elena lay on the small cot provided in the corner of Lila's room, keeping her presence steady and reassuring. Sometimes, she hummed softly in the dark until Lila's restless breathing slowed into sleep. Christopher Hale noticed the changes first in the sound of his daughter's laughter drifting down the grand staircase. It had been so long since he'd heard it that it startled him at first, pulling him from late-night business calls and heavy thoughts. Christopher was a man molded by responsibility, his broad shoulders carrying both the weight of his company and the quiet grief of losing his wife. Reserved, dignified, always polished in tailored suits, he rarely allowed cracks in his. Yet when he saw Lila clutching Elena's hand and giggling at some whispered joke, something inside him eased. His daughter was healing, little by little, and he knew Elena was the reason. One evening, Christopher paused at the doorway of the playroom. Lila was kneeling on the rug, a crayon in her hand, coloring a picture of a house with a large garden. Elena sat beside her, not correcting, not instructing, but simply coloring her own page alongside Lila, as though it were the most important task in the world. Christopher cleared his throat gently. Lila looked up, her eyes bright, and for the first time in months she spoke without hesitation. "Papa, look!" Elena made a rainbow. The words were simple, but they struck him with the force of a miracle. He met Elena's gaze, gratitude unspoken but powerful. She smiled, dipping her head in acknowledgement before returning to Lila's drawing. But not everyone in the house welcomed Elena's presence. Vanessa Carlyle, Christopher's fiancée, made her entrance like a scene from a high society magazine. Tall, poised, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a wardrobe of couture, she embodied elegance and sophistication. To outsiders, she was the perfect match for a man of Christopher's stature. Yet behind her flawless smile lay a calculating sharpness. When she first laid eyes on Elena, her gaze lingered not on kindness but on appraisal, as though measuring the fabric of Elena's blouse and the modest cut of her skirt. To Vanessa, Elena was not a person but the help, a background character in the carefully curated image she envisioned for her future. At dinner that night, Vanessa draped herself elegantly at Christopher's side, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Lila sat quietly, pushing peas around her plate. Elena, seated further down at the staff's table as usual, watched carefully. When Christopher turned to take a business call, Vanessa leaned toward Lila with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You should eat, darling," she said, in a sing-song tone that felt rehearsed. Lila's shoulders hunched, and her fork clattered onto the plate. Elena's heart tugged, but she kept her seat, offering the child an encouraging smile instead. Later, when she tucked Lila into bed, Elena whispered gently, "You did very well tonight. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to be you." Lila's small hand curled around Elena's fingers, her eyes shining with trust. The contrast was clear. Where Vanessa saw inconvenience, Elena saw need. Where Vanessa applied polish, Elena offered patience. And Christopher, though careful not to show favoritism, began to notice the subtle lines dividing the two women in his life. Elena was no socialite, no polished ornament for galas and fundraisers, but she was the one who coaxed warmth back into his daughter's world. Over the next weeks, the house shifted. The once echoing halls began to hum with the small but precious sound of a child's recovery. Elena's sacrifices went unnoticed by most. How she skipped meals to save her share of dessert for Lila. How she stayed up late mending the torn ear of Mr. Buttons so the stuffed rabbit was whole again by morning. How she endured the occasional cutting remark from Vanessa with quiet dignity. But to Lila, these acts were everything. And to Christopher, though he rarely said it aloud, Elena had become more than a nanny. She was a source of hope, a reminder that even in a mansion shadowed by grief and expectation, warmth could still bloom. Elena grew accustomed to the rhythms of the Hale household, though they were unlike any life she had known before. The mornings began with sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, filtered by curtains too heavy for a child's room. She would open them wide, letting the fresh air in, while Lila sat on her bed with sleepy eyes and Mr. Buttons tucked under her chin. Elena would coax her gently out of bed, humming as she helped the little girl into a dress that didn't feel too stiff or fussy. Sometimes Lila resisted, retreating into silence, but Elena never rushed. She would kneel, her voice low and patient. "We have time, sweetheart. The day will wait for you." And slowly, Lila would nod. Christopher often caught glimpses of these mornings from the doorway. He rarely interrupted, knowing his presence sometimes made Lila shy. Instead, he watched Elena's patience with a mixture of awe and gratitude. She had a way of creating small worlds of safety where his daughter could breathe. It was something money could never buy, and it unsettled him how deeply he relied on Elena's presence to bring balance to their fractured home. Yet not every corner of the mansion welcomed her warmth. Vanessa's visits became more frequent as wedding plans moved forward. She arrived in sleek cars, her heels clicking against marble floors like a metronome of control. Her perfume lingered long after she had left a room, a reminder of her dominance in the household. To her, Elena was invisible unless she needed to remind her of her place. A cool remark here, a glance of disdain there, it was all carefully calculated. "You've done your job well enough, Miss Rivera," Vanessa would say, with a polite smile that felt like a blade wrapped in silk. "But remember, children must learn discipline, not indulgence." Elena swallowed her replies, focusing instead on Lila's timid smiles and the quiet progress they were making. She had no illusions about her status here. She was staff, a temporary presence in a world that glittered far beyond her reach. Still, she could not help but feel a protective surge whenever Vanessa dismissed Lila with a wave of her manicured hand. The girl deserved more than formality, and indifference. She deserved tenderness. One rainy afternoon, thunder rolled across the sky as Lila cowered by the window, her hands pressed to her ears. The storm reminded her of nights when her mother had been gone too long, when fear had filled the silence of the house. Elena knelt beside her, pulling the child gently into her arms. "It's only the cows talking," she whispered, rocking her slowly. "They're loud because they have so much to say, but we're safe, we're together." Lila's trembling eased and she pressed her face into Elena's shoulder. When Christopher found them later, his daughter asleep in Elena's embrace, he felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. It was trust, it was relief, and it was dangerous. At dinner the next evening, Vanessa noticed the change. Christopher's eyes lingered on Elena a fraction too long, his gratitude too evident. She masked her irritation with a smile, but beneath the table, her nails dug into her palm. Vanessa prided herself on control, on orchestrating every aspect of her life like a flawless, and yet here was this young nanny, barely more than a girl, holding a kind of power Vanessa could never command. The love of a child and the respect of a man she intended to marry. It was intolerable. The following week, Vanessa insisted on hosting a dinner for close friends and business associates. The dining hall was transformed into a vision of elegance. Candles flickering in crystal holders, silverware gleaming under soft chandeliers. Elena was instructed to keep Lila entertained upstairs during the event, but the little girl grew restless, hearing laughter and music drifting through the mansion. She wanted to see her father, to be part of the world that excluded her. Elena hesitated, torn between rules and the child's longing. At last, she took Lila's hand and led her quietly toward the balcony overlooking the dining hall. From above, they watched the gathering. Men in tailored suits, women in glittering gowns, Vanessa commanding the room with her polished charm. Christopher sat at her side, his posture perfect though his expression was weary. Lila squeezed Elena's hand. "Papa looks sad," she whispered. Elena's heart twisted, but before she could reply, Vanessa's gaze flicked upward. Their eyes met, and in that instant, Elena knew she had made a mistake. Vanessa's smile faltered, and beneath it simmered something sharp and unforgiving. Later that night, Vanessa found Elena in the hallway outside Lila's room. Her voice was low, smooth, but cold. "It's not your place to decide what my fiancé's daughter needs. You are here to do as you're told, remember that." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying. "This family is not yours, it never will be." With that, she swept away, leaving Elena rooted to the floor, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Inside the bedroom, Lila stirred restlessly in her sleep. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. She had endured worse than sharp words, but for the first time, Peter wasn't noticing her the same way. For the first time, she wondered if her place in the Hale household was more fragile than she had believed. And yet, the bond between her and Lila deepened. Every small victory mattered. The first time Lila spoke confidently to a gardener, the day she ran laughing across the lawn chasing bubbles, the night she whispered, "Don't leave," as Elena tucked her in. Each moment stitched them closer together, threads of trust and love weaving a fabric stronger than Vanessa's disdain. Elena reminded herself that she was here for the child, not for the approval of others. That was enough. But Christopher could not ignore the storm brewing beneath the surface. He saw the tension in Vanessa's tight smiles, heard the edge in her voice when she spoke of Elena. He also saw the light in his daughter's eyes, a light he had thought lost forever, and he knew who had brought it back. In quiet moments, he found himself drawn to the thought of Elena's sacrifice, the way she skipped meals, the nights she dozed lightly on a cot to ensure Lila never woke alone. He admired her strength, her patience, her quiet resilience, and though he said nothing, the silence between them grew thick with unspoken gratitude, and something more dangerous still. The mansion had become a stage of contrasts. In the grand dining hall, Vanessa spun visions of the future, dazzling guests with her charm. In the quiet corners of the nursery, Elena rebuilt the broken heart of a little girl with nothing more than kindness and consistency. Between these two worlds, Christopher stood, torn between duty and instinct, between the polished life expected of him and the simple truth unfolding before his eyes. The tension coiled tighter with each passing day, though none of them yet knew how violently it would unravel. For now, though, there was only the fragile peace of beginnings. Lila laughed more often. Alina worked tirelessly, her sacrifices unnoticed except by the child who mattered most. Vanessa plodded in silence, her eyes sharp with unspoken schemes. And Christopher, though he did not yet act, felt the foundations of his carefully ordered life begin to shift. It was only a matter of time before the cracks widened into something none of them could ignore. Vanessa arrived the next morning with white peonies and resolve that posed as kindness. She declared a girls' tea party in the playroom, porcelain cups clicking too loudly. Lila sat on the rug, wary and polite, her small hands hovering above the sugar bowl as if permission were a trap. Elena waited by the bookshelf, posture loose, smile quiet. 2 sugars, Vanessa decided, dropping tubes before Lila could answer. Ladies love sweetness. Lila flinched at the clang of the spoon and reached for Mr. Buttons. Vanessa smiled tightly. You're a big girl now, no toys at the table. Her cheerful fingers lifted the rabbit. Alina moved a fraction. Mr. Buttons can be our guest, she offered. He's well behaved. A gasp escaped Lila. Vanessa hesitated, then relented. The tea party lasted minutes, conversation thinning to weather. Cups became obstacles. Use your words, darling, Vanessa urged, fast and bright, as if fluency could be drilled. Lila's gaze drifted to Elena, who answered with a nod so small it was almost a breath. The child's shoulders. When it ended, Vanessa set the cups down with just enough emphasis to ring. She needs structure, she told Elena, as if delivering a diagnosis. Firmness will help her mature. Elena smiled. And gentleness will help her try. That afternoon, Christopher found Lila at the window seat, drawing a yellow sun with heavy rays. Elena sat beside her, not instructing, only echoing. 2 suns swelled together. Vanessa watched from the doorway, arms folded, measuring the exchange she could not enter. Christopher rested a hand on her back, meaning reassurance. She mistook it for alliance. She'll come around, he murmured. It's only been a short while. Of course, Vanessa said smoothly. Children are adaptable, once we insist on the right habits. Alina heard the edge and let it pass. She practiced a discipline more difficult than obedience. Patience that does not perform for praise. Attempts at bonding multiplied. Vanessa arranged a riding lesson with a pony trainer and polished boots. Lila loved animals but froze at the high stirrup and the quick rhythm of commands. Foot here, eyes up, the trainer said while Vanessa crouched to Lila's shoulder and whispered, we can just brush her mane today. Relief washed the child. She praised her cheek into the pony's neck and breathed. Evening brought new exercises. Vanessa printed worksheets. 10 pages nightly, she announced, tapping each line. Lila stumbled and closed the book. Alina reopened it and pointed at the picture. What color is his hat? Blue. What sound became a game, the story a shoreline she could step onto. Christopher moved between ledger and lullaby. Vanessa was immaculate at galas and efficient. He had chosen her in a season when efficiency felt like love. Yet passing the nursery at midnight, hearing Elena's low humming and seeing Lila's hand curled around her sleeve, something unnameable loosened. The first cut arrived, wrapped in laughter. Vanessa hosted 2 friends for terrace coffee. Elena set down a tray and turned to leave. Stay a moment, Vanessa sang. I want to ask about Lila's schedule. A friend examined Elena's face, the way one inspects a label. She's pretty, she murmured. She's sweet, Vanessa replied with a careless smile. But she's just a maid with a pretty face. The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. They dropped like a small, heavy stone into a clear pool. Elena felt the ripple to her bones. She inclined her head and left, steps even, breath measured for Lila's sake. In the kitchen, she stood very still, hands braced on the counter, until the sting dulled. That evening, the humiliations turned precise. Vanessa corrected how Elena folded Lila's napkin, triangular, not square, then shifted the water glass a 1/4 inch. Children notice symmetry, she told Christopher, as if citing a study. Lila noticed something else, the way Elena's eyes softened, the way she turned correction into comfort. Shall we make a tent? Elena asked, draping the napkin into a peak and placing Monsieur Buttons inside. Lila giggled and ate. Later, as Elena carried dishes, Vanessa's voice floated after her. You're not at fault. she told Christopher, implying the opposite. She means well. But if we indulge every feeling, Lila will never grow up. She's 5, he said quietly. Exactly, Vanessa answered. Habits start now. Elena chose silence. She tucked Lila into bed and whispered the sentence she had whispered 100 times. You are safe. We will try again tomorrow. The child's fingers found hers in the dark. Safety, Elena had learned, is a rhythm built by returning. Christopher's confidant, Damien, arrived for a late meeting the next day. They walked the grounds while gardeners trimmed hedges into obedient lines. Through an open door, they saw Elena guide Lila over taped paper squares, pretending the hallway was a river. Lila laughed. Vanessa stood nearby, directing a florist. It was good with the girl, Damien said. As Christopher answered. Maluka isn't, Damien said. There's a difference. She'll find her way with time, Christopher said. Damien's glance slid to Vanessa, then back. Time reveals character. It doesn't manufacture it. Christopher said nothing. Loyalty is a habit, and his was to the vows he had not yet made. Even so, cracks spread. Vanessa planned a baking session for a casual video. Flour dusted the marble like snow. Lila reached for the whisk. Vanessa took it back. Too messy, she said lightly, turning the bowl as if she could outrun the child's disappointment. Elena placed a second bowl and a wooden spoon in Lila's hands. This one makes music, she whispered, tapping a rhythm. Lila drummed softly. After the cameras, Vanessa cornered Elena by the pantry. You keep undermining me? I make room, Elena said calmly. The video posted that night gleamed with captions about family. Comments praised Vanessa's elegance. None of them could hear the sentence that landed like a bruise, just a maid with a pretty face. Elena switched off her phone and sat on the edge of her cot, listening to Lila's steady breath. Outside, pool lights flickered. Somewhere beyond the hedges, the city kept measuring worth by shine. Morning came with small hands and certainty. Lila climbed into Elena's lap and tucked Mr. Buttons beneath her chin. Stay with me today, she asked. Right here, Elena answered, and meant it. She braided Lila's curls with ribbons and planned a garden walk where hedges could be castles. Behind them, Vanessa's heels clicked a tidy tempo. Ahead, the day opened its hands. By week's end, Vanessa rebuilt her smile into something glossy and unyielding. She scheduled a donor's brunch in the winter garden. Lila's dress scratched her neck. Elena loosened the ribbon. Vanessa announced a literacy fund and accepted applause. Lila stayed close to Elena, repeating colors by the koi, gold, orange. Christopher watched, relieved. After guests left, Vanessa entered with a practiced frown. Miss Rivera, keep Lila in the center next time, Vanessa said. Corners teach avoidance. Speaks when the noise is soft, Elena answered. Actually respied. Secretly, he spoke when it isn't, Vanessa replied. Christopher joined them. Thank you both, he said. Vanessa took his arm. The small humiliations continued. Place, settings, schedules, even bedtime prayers. Elena met each like a harbor meets a wave and returned to the work. In private, Christopher listed the ways Vanessa eased his public life. The machine stayed polished. But the machine did not hold his daughter. Elena did. He told himself, love for a child and respect for a partner need not collide. One afternoon, he found Elena and Lila in the music room. Elena tapped a 4-week rhythm and invited Lila to echo it on the floor. Again, she said, and the rhythm grew short. Lila tugged his sleeve. Papa, listen. Vanessa entered, clapped once. Beautiful, tomorrow we begin real lessons. Scales, posture, 20 minutes. Lila's mouth closed. Elena tapped a final quiet beat, telling the child the music was still hers. Later, Elena paused in the side hall at Vanessa's voice on speakerphone. Christopher is sentimental about the nanny. Sweet girl, pretty face, nothing more. After the wedding, we'll bring in professionals. Elena stood very still, then returned to Lila with a smile that reached only the child. That evening, Damien poured scotch in the library. I've watched enough, he said. Vanessa treats Elena as an accessory. You feel it. Change, Christopher said. Slowly revealed, Damien replied. Start with the smallest life in this house. Christopher thought of shareholders and headlines, then of Lila's new word, again, and the seam of relief he felt hearing their laughter. Next morning, he praised Vanessa's fundraiser work and thanked Elena for soudiettes. We all have our roles, Vanessa said. To Elena, support the family quietly. Please clear personal decisions. Yesterday's garden detour cost 20 minutes. Elena said. Layla slid to the window. What do you see? Elena asked. What is it doing? Asking, Lila answered. The words cut Christopher. He found Elena in the hallway later, apology on his tongue. She shook her head gently. You don't owe me one, she said. Just choose what is kindest for her. I'm trying, he said. No, she answered, and the knowledge helped and hurt at once. That afternoon, Vanessa staged a salon lesson. Flashcards, posture, a ticking clock. Lila stumbled. Again, Vanessa said. Christopher, passing, saw the tremor and opened the door. Enough. We agreed on 20 minutes, Vanessa replied. 19 is enough for today, he said. Lila slid into Elena's arms. Vanessa's smile hardened. That night, the staff corridor hummed with sympathy. The cook left an extra roll, the housekeeper squeezed her shoulder. Elena saved the bread for morning and stitched Mr. Button's ear. Christopher stood at his window, listening to Elena's story cadence, telling himself again that Vanessa needed time. At Sunday supper, Lila asked Elena to sit with them. Vanessa allowed it with a thin smile. Conversation went bright and brittle. Vanessa corrected a composer's name, Elena thanked her and continued in simple, vivid words. Lila listened, rapt. They ended the meal with laughter that did not include everyone. Vanessa's smile held, her gaze slid away. Night closed gently. Elena tucked Lila in and whispered, "You are safe." In the hall, she steadied herself and moved on. Vanessa folded dresses. Christopher stared at a blank page until he wrote 2 words, "Be kind." The next day brought a small victory only 3 people saw. Elena and Lila planted marigold seeds in a box on the balcony. Lila pressed soil with her thumbs. "Will they grow?" she asked. "We always try," Elena said. "We help." Christopher stepped out with 2 glasses of water. He gave the small one to Lila, for the brave. She poured carefully. A splash hit Elena's wrist. Lila wiped it with her dress and whispered, "Sorry." It was the first unprompted apology in months. Christopher met Elena's eyes and let gratitude be visible. Inside, Vanessa watched through the glass. "You're encouraging dependency," she told Christopher later. "She clings because Elena invites it. Clings because she feels safe," he answered. "She must learn safety without being coddled," Vanessa said. "We are not raising a charity case." Damien arrived mid-afternoon and heard the tale of that sentence. When they stood by the study window, he spoke plainly. "You can love Vanessa's drive and still refuse her contempt." "With contempt? Isn't contempt," Christopher said. "Decide what weather you want your child to grow up in." That night, Elena found a drawing on the nursery table. 2 stick figures holding hands, and a third nearby with a crown like a pony's mane. "Us," Lila said. "We belong." Elena taped it where the child could see it from her pillow. Outside, the lawn lights came on softly. Tonight, the sun streamed in through the tall windows of the Hale Estate's courtyard, painting the marble tiles with warm light. Elena knelt beside Lila near the fountain, her gentle voice guiding the child as she balanced her toy rabbit on the edge of the stone basin. The girl's laughter echoed like bells, light and unstrained, something that had become more frequent in recent weeks. Christopher, who had just returned from the office, paused at a distance. He leaned against one of the pillars, unseen for a moment, watching the quiet bond between his daughter and her nanny. The sight softened the hard lines of his face. Then came Vanessa. She stepped out into the courtyard with the kind of poise that drew eyes without effort, her heels clicking against the stone as her silk dress swayed with each step. She spotted the small scene, her eyes narrowing just slightly when she saw Lila throw her arms around Elena's neck in a spontaneous hug. "Lila," Vanessa said, her voice sharp though coated in a thin layer of sweetness. "That's enough clinging for now. Don't you think it's time to practice being with your real family?" The little girl stiffened, her arms loosening from Elena's shoulders. Confusion clouded her bright eyes. Elena felt the tension ripple through her, and she smoothed a hand over the child's hair as if shielding her. "She's fine, Vanessa," Elena said softly, forcing her voice to remain calm, though her pulse quickened. "We were just enjoying a quiet moment." But Vanessa wasn't appeased. She crouched down, her manicured fingers reaching to adjust Lila's dress as though she were straightening something, though her tone carried a reprimand. "Sweetheart, you don't need to hold on to everyone. You have your father, you have me. That's enough. Don't make a habit of this. Depend on..." Christopher finally stepped forward, sensing the strain. "Is everything all right?" Vanessa turned instantly, her smile brightening as if a switch had been flipped. "Of course, darling. I was just reminding Lila that she doesn't need to smother Elena. Children need balance, don't they?" He glanced at his daughter, who now pressed her face into Elena's shoulder, as if trying to disappear. Christopher's brow furrowed, but before he could speak, Vanessa glided over and looped her arm through his, laughing lightly. "Come, let's not hover." They managed. Elena held Lila close, her own heart aching at the subtle rejection the child had just endured. She whispered into her ear, "You're safe with me, always." That evening, after the house had settled into its evening hush, Elena was in the nursery tucking Lila into bed. The little girl clung to her hand even after the last lullaby was sung. Elena leaned over, pressing a kiss to her forehead, whispering reassurance in the dim glow of the nightlight. "I'll be here when you wake. You're never alone." It was then that Vanessa entered, the sharp click of her heels muted on the carpet but still unnerving. She lingered by the doorway until Elena stood and turned to face her. Vanessa's smile was brittle, the kind that carried more venom than warmth. "Such devotion," she murmured once Lila's eyes fluttered closed. "You almost make me believe you care more for her than her own family does." "I do care for her," Elena said, her voice steady but low. "She's a child who needs love, patience, and time." Vanessa's eyes hardened. She stepped closer, her perfume filling the space as she leaned in. "Let's be clear. You don't belong in this family. You're just a nanny. Don't mistake kindness for acceptance. Know your place, Elena, and remember it well." The words struck like a blow. Elena felt her throat tighten, but she refused to let the tears fall while Vanessa was watching. She glanced at the sleeping form of Lila, who stirred faintly as if sensing the tension. With all the strength she could summon, Elena straightened her. "For Lila," she said firmly, her voice almost a whisper. "Nothing else matters." Vanessa's lips curved into a mocking smirk. "How noble, but let's hope your self-control holds when things..." With that, she turned and swept out of the room, leaving behind a silence that pressed heavily against Elena's chest. Elena stood there, her hands trembling at her sides. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat and returned to Lila's bedside. The child's small hand stretched unconsciously toward her, as though sensing her distress even in sleep. Elena knelt again and clasped it gently, whispering into the quiet, "I will never leave you, not ever." Her tears finally slipped free then, but she let them fall silently where Lila could not see. Moments later, Christopher appeared in the hallway. He had intended to check on his daughter before heading to bed. As he stepped into the nursery, he saw Elena hastily brushing away her tears, her face pale and strained. "Elena," he said softly, his concern immediate. "Is something wrong?" She quickly shook her head, forcing a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "Just a long day, sir. Lila had trouble settling down, but she's resting now." His gaze lingered on her, noticing the faint redness around her eyes, the way her hands twisted slightly against her apron. But before he could press further, Vanessa reappeared in the corridor. Her expression was one of serene composure, as though nothing had passed between them earlier. "For you," squirreled Christopher, she said sweetly. "I was just waiting for you." He glanced between the two women, suspicion flickering in his eyes, but Elena quickly lowered her gaze. She could not risk Lila waking to conflict, so she whispered another good night to the child, bowed her head, and slipped past him. Vanessa moved into the room, all smiles, her hand finding Christopher's arm as though nothing at all was amiss. Elena walked down the hall with quiet steps, her heart heavy with the secret she now carried. Lena sat in the nursery after Vanessa left, her back against the wall, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The words echoed in her ears like a cruel chant. "You don't belong in this family, you're just a nanny." She tried to steady her breathing, afraid Lila would sense her distress. A small hand tugged at her sleeve. Lila's round eyes, wide with innocence, looked up at her. "Lena, are you okay?" Alina forced a smile and pulled the little girl into her lap. "Of course, my star, I'm fine. Don't you worry about me." She kissed the top of Lila's head, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo, grounding herself in the warmth of the child she loved as if she were her own. Alina whispered softly, "I'll never leave you, no matter what." The promise was quiet, meant only for the child's ears, but Elena felt the weight of it press into her chest. She didn't know how long she could keep her position in this house, not with Vanessa's hostility. But she knew one truth: she would not abandon Lila to loneliness again. That night, the Hale mansion gleamed with golden light from its chandeliers. Guests filled the dining room, their laughter spilling into the hallways. Vanessa played hostess, moving gracefully among them, her charm turned on full display. Christopher, dressed in his usual understated elegance, watched her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Elena stood near the child end of the room with Lila, making sure the child ate something before the desserts disappeared into trays. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa called out, her tone saccharine. "Elena, dear, could you bring another napkin for Mr. Harrington? You see, she's such a sweet girl, but she tends to forget her manners sometimes." The guest chuckled politely, unaware of the sting in Vanessa's words. Elena lowered her gaze, nodded, and obeyed. When she returned, Vanessa added lightly, "You know, Elena grew up in a small town, isn't that right? Not quite accustomed to settings like these." The implication lingered in the air. Elena's cheeks burned, but she stayed silent. She would not cause a scene in front of Lila. Christopher glanced at Elena briefly, catching the flicker of discomfort in her expression. His hand tightened around his wineglass. Still, he said nothing. He told himself that Vanessa's teasing was harmless, just her way of adjusting to Elena's presence. He didn't want conflict. Not tonight. Later, as the guests departed and the house quieted, Christopher found Elena in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. She looked tired, the shadows under her eyes deeper than usual. He hesitated before asking, "Are you all right? You seemed unsettled earlier." Elena's heart raced. Should she tell him? Should she reveal the venom that Vanessa spewed in private? But the thought of Lila, of what could happen if she spoke out and was dismissed, stopped her. Instead, she offered a small smile and said, "I'm fine, Mr. Hale, just a little tired, that's all." Christopher frowned slightly. He wanted to believe her, but something in her voice told him she was holding back. Before he could press further, Vanessa entered the kitchen, her arm slipping easily around his. "Darling, don't keep her too long. She's got duties tomorrow, and so do you." Her tone was light, but her eyes met Elena's, cold and sharp as glass. Elena dropped her gaze, watching the last plate in silence. The days that followed grew heavier. Vanessa became more insistent in her attempts to bond with Lila, but her patience frayed quickly. When Lila clung to Elena instead, Vanessa's irritation showed. She began correcting Elena's every move, how she dressed the child, how she prepared her meals, even how she read bedtime stories. Each correction was framed as helpful, but beneath the words lay the same cruel refrain: "You don't belong here." In the afternoon, Christopher returned early from a business meeting. As he walked past the nursery, he paused at the sound of muffled voices. Vanessa's sharp tone cut through the air. "I don't care how much she clings to you. You are staff, Elena. Do you understand? Staff. And when Christopher and I are married, I'll decide who stays in this house." Elena's voice, soft but firm, answered, "I love Lila. I won't let her feel abandoned again. She needs stability." Vanessa laughed, a sound cold as ice. "Stability? She needs her real family, not some outsider who pretends to be more than she is." Christopher froze outside the door, his pulse hammering. For the first time, he heard the words for himself, not softened by excuses or hidden behind smiles. Vanessa's cruelty rang clear. He opened the door quietly, but by then, Vanessa's tone had shifted to something sweeter, her lips curved in a smile. Elena sat on the floor beside Lila's toy chest, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. "Krisu," Vanessa said brightly. "We were just talking about how wonderful Elena is with Lila. She really is a treasure, isn't she?" Elena didn't meet his gaze. Christopher studied her carefully, sensing the truth behind her silence. But he said nothing, not yet. He needed to see more, to be certain of what was happening in his own home. That evening, Elena tucked Lila into bed, the child curled close, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Lena, don't let her send you away. Promise me," Lila whispered, her voice trembling. Elena kissed her forehead. "I promise, little star, I'm not going anywhere." The words felt fragile, as though they could break under the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on her, but she repeated them anyway, because Lila needed them. Alone in her small room, Elena sat by the window, staring at the night sky. She thought of her own family, of the sacrifices she had made to be here. She thought of Lila's laughter, of the way the child's eyes lit up whenever she entered the room, and she thought of Vanessa's voice slicing through her like a knife. Tears burned her eyes, but she wiped them quickly away. She could not afford to show weakness. Not here, not when a little girl depended on her strength. Downstairs, Christopher poured himself a drink. Damien, his old friend and business partner, had stayed late to discuss an upcoming deal. But when he saw Christopher's distracted expression, he asked, "What's on your mind?" Christopher hesitated before answering. "Vanessa, I keep hearing things, little things. I don't know if I'm imagining them or if there's something I'm not seeing." Damien leaned back, his eyes sharp. "I've watched her, Chris. She's beautiful, yes, but she's not kind. Not to your daughter, and certainly not to Elena. You need to open your eyes before it's too late." Christopher stared into his glass, torn between loyalty to the woman he had promised to marry and the gnawing sense that Damien was right. He remembered the look on Elena's face earlier, the pain she tried to hide. He remembered Lila's growing dependence on her, her fear of being left alone. For the first time, Christopher allowed himself to wonder, had he made a mistake in bringing Vanessa into their lives? Upstairs, in the quiet of the nursery, Elena sat beside Lila's bed until the child fell asleep. She brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead, whispering, "I'm here, always." The words were a vow, whispered into the shadows, unseen but unbreakable. And in the silence of that night, though no one else could hear it, a storm was already building inside the Hale mansion. Lawyer Kaltovich wrote the line alone in another room, all at once discovered no one could secrets, pain, or mysteries, and revealed truths too powerful to ignore. The Hale mansion was alive with preparation. Staff moved briskly through the halls, polishing silver trays, arranging fresh flowers, and setting candles along the dining table that would later host influential guests. It was one of those evenings when Christopher needed everything to run with precision, the kind of nights his father once insisted were the foundation of their family's reputation. Yet while the house glowed with outward warmth, an undercurrent of unease was about to fracture everything. Christopher stood at the far end of the corridor, fastening the cufflinks on his white shirt. He could hear faint voices carrying through the grand hallway. The tones were unmistakable, sharp, cutting, and distinctly Vanessa's. His fiancée's voice was laced with a kind of polished disdain that never quite revealed itself in front of him. Tonight, however, she was not aware he was only a few steps away, adjusting his jacket before joining her. "You really should remember your place," Vanessa's voice hissed, low but venomous. "Don't get comfortable here, Elena. This is not your home. Once I'm married to Christopher, you're gone. You and your little charity projects don't belong in this family." The words sliced through the polished air like glass breaking against marble. Christopher's hand froze on the cufflink. For a moment, he wondered if his ears deceived him. But no, Vanessa's tone was so sharp, so deliberate, there was no mistaking it. He felt his chest tighten, as if invisible bands were pulling it inward. Elena's softer voice followed, tremulous but steady. "I've never claimed to belong, Miss Vanessa. I only care for Lila's happiness. That's all." There was silence, followed by a scoff. "Lila's happiness," Vanessa marked. "That child needs to learn who her real family is. You've made her dependent on you. It's pathetic." When I'm her stepmother, she'll learn discipline, not clinging to a servant like you." Christopher's jaw locked. Rage surged in him, hot, unexpected, and unshakable. For weeks, he had brushed aside the subtle warnings, Damien's raised brows, even Lila's quiet withdrawal when Vanessa entered the room. He had told himself Vanessa needed time, that her elegance and sharp wit would eventually soften into compassion. But now, hearing this unfiltered cruelty, something within him cracked. Alina's reply was soft, but the ache behind it carried even to Christopher's ears. "She's just a little girl who lost her mother. If my comfort gives her strength, then I won't apologize." "I won't apologize for protecting what's mine," Vanessa snapped. "This family, this life, is not for you. Enjoy it while it lasts, because the moment the vows are spoken, I'll see to it you're dismissed. Permanently." Christopher didn't wait another second. His steps were steady but heavy against the polished wooden floor as he closed the distance. He turned the corner, his tall frame filling the nursery doorway where Vanessa and Elena stood. Vanessa froze mid-smirk, her carefully composed face faltering as she caught sight of him. Elena, standing near Lila's bed with a folded blanket in her arms, paled instantly. Christopher's voice was colder than either woman had ever heard. "Is that so, Vanessa?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Vanessa's eyes darted, first toward Elena, then back to Christopher, scrambling for composure. Her lips parted in a laugh too brittle to be real. "Darling, you startled me. You must have misheard." "I didn't mishear a word," Christopher cut in, his tone sharp as steel. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier as he stepped closer. His gaze didn't waver, pinning Vanessa in place. "You said Elena doesn't belong. You said once you're married, you'll dismiss her. Tell me, Vanessa, is that how you see people who've given my daughter more kindness in weeks than you've offered her in months?" Vanessa's posture stiffened. She smoothed a hand down her jeweled gown, trying to summon the charm that had once captivated him. "Christopher, please. I was frustrated. You know how demanding children can be. Elena's influence is distracting. I only meant to put boundaries in place." "Boundaries," Christopher repeated, the word tasting like ash. He glanced briefly at Elena, whose face was carefully lowered, though her trembling hands betrayed her turmoil. She looked as if she might dissolve into the floor from shame, as though she were guilty for being the cause of this confrontation. That image twisted his gut. "You think humiliating her, mocking her sacrifices, and threatening her with dismissal is setting boundaries?" Christopher's voice deepened, carrying an authority that left no room for argument. "That's not boundaries, Vanessa. That's cruelty." Vanessa's smile faltered, her carefully painted mask cracking at last. "Christopher, don't overreact. You're letting a servant's tears cloud your judgment. She works here, that's all." Elena finally spoke, her voice so faint Christopher almost missed it. "She's right, Mr. Hale. I shouldn't cause trouble. Maybe it's best if I leave the house." Her words cut him deeper than Vanessa's venom. His head turned sharply, his eyes locking with hers. "No, Elena. You're not the problem here." His tone carried a finality that brooked no argument. Vanessa stepped forward quickly, her manicured hand brushing his sleeve in a gesture that once melted him, but now felt like ice. "Darling, you're being harsh. I only want what's best for you and Lila. Surely you see Elena's influence is dangerous. The child will never respect me if she clings to this nanny as though she were family." Christopher pulled his arm back, his eyes burning with restrained fury. "Respect isn't forced, Vanessa. It's earned, something Elena understands far better than you do." For the first time since he had proposed, Vanessa's face revealed something unpolished. Fear. Elena's heart raced as she stood frozen between them, unable to breathe. The nursery's pastel walls, once her safe haven with Lila, now felt like a stage where every word carried unbearable weight. She wanted to speak, to explain, to disappear, but Christopher's unwavering gaze kept her rooted in place. "Christopher, listen to me," Vanessa pleaded, her voice dropping into a velvety tone she usually reserved for social events. "This nanny is manipulating you. Don't you see? She plays the innocent, but she's made you dependent on her presence. That's not loyalty." Christopher laughed once, short and disbelieving. "Strategy? Elena sacrifices her own meals so my daughter eats. She wakes in the middle of the night when Lila cries. She whispers to her that she'll never leave, even when she's treated like nothing more than the help. That's not manipulation. That's... The word hung in the air like a verdict. Vanessa's face hardened, her mask breaking completely as her lips curled. So that's what this is. You've fallen for her charity act sweetness. Tell me, Christopher, is that it? Have you fallen for your nanny? Elena's stomach lurched. Heat rushed to her cheeks, and she lowered her eyes, ashamed though she had done nothing wrong. She wanted to deny, to insist she had only ever cared for Lila, but the lump in her throat silenced her. Christopher's voice, however, remained firm. This isn't about me. This is about the woman who has been more of a mother to my daughter in months than you have tried to be. You talk about family, Vanessa, but family doesn't mock or belittle. Family protect. For the first time in their relationship, Vanessa was speechless. Her chest rose and fell sharply, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening around the edge of her dress. Elena tried to step forward, her voice trembling. Please don't argue because of me. I can go. I can pack tonight. Lila doesn't need this tension. Christopher turned toward her, his expression softening just enough to silence her words. No, Elena, you're not leaving. Not now, not ever, unless it's what you want. I won't let cruelty chase you from the only place my daughter feels safe. His words stole the air from her lungs. For so long, Elena had believed her role was fragile, temporary, one word from Vanessa away from collapse. Now, hearing Christopher's steady voice affirm her place, a flicker of something like hope stirred inside her chest. Vanessa, however, wasn't finished. You're making a mistake, Christopher. People will talk. Do you want them to think you've replaced your fiancé with the nanny? Do you want the board, your investors, your family name tarnished? Christopher's glare silenced her. I'd rather they whisper about me forever than raise my daughter in a house poisoned by cruelty. The words landed like a door slamming shut. Vanessa's eyes widened, and for the first time her voice faltered. You can't mean that. I mean every word, Christopher said, his voice like stone. I won't marry someone who looks at kindness and calls it weakness. I won't bring a woman into my daughter's life who teaches her that love must be earned by fear. Elena's hands tightened around the blanket she still held, her knuckles white. She had never wished to stand between them, never wanted to be the cause of conflict. But in that moment, she realized the truth wasn't about her. It was about what kind of home Lila would grow up in. The silence stretched until Vanessa finally found her footing again. Her chin lifted, pride still her shield. You'll regret this, Christopher. You'll regret throwing away everything we've built for a servant. Christopher's eyes didn't waver. What we built was a facade, and tonight, it collapsed. Vanessa's breath caught, but she didn't respond. She spun sharply, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she stormed out of the nursery. The echo of her steps faded into the grand hall, leaving a stillness that rang louder than her departure. Elena felt her knees weaken. She set the blanket down and pressed a hand against the bedpost for support. Her throat burned with unshed tears. Mr. Hale, I never meant to cause... Tonight? His voice softened, the edge melting away. He stepped closer, lowering himself slightly so their eyes could meet. You've caused nothing but healing here. It's Vanessa who brought poison into this home, not you. Elena shook her head faintly, struggling to contain the storm of emotions inside her. But she's right about one thing. People will talk. And your world, it's not one I belong in. Christopher's jaw tightened, but his eyes carried something new. Something unshaken. You belong here because my daughter trusts you. Because you've given her back laughter and courage. And that's more valuable than every polished dinner or whispered reputation. Elena's lips trembled as she tried to form a reply, but Lila stirred in her bed, letting out a small whimper. Instinctively, Elena moved to the child's side, brushing a hand across her hair. Christopher watched as the little girl, sensing Elena's presence, relaxed again into sleep. That single moment spoke louder than any argument. Christopher exhaled, heavy but resolute. You're not leaving, Elena. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Not as long as Lila needs you, and she always will. Her heart pounded at the conviction in his tone, yet fear still gnawed at her edges. But deep inside, a fragile seed of trust began to take root. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as replaceable as she had always believed. The nursery was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could yet name, but both could feel in the air. Uncharted, fragile, and irrevocably real. Chandeliers glittered like frozen stars above the grand ballroom, their light dancing across rows of crystal glasses and polished silverware. Waiters moved like shadows, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres through clusters of finely dressed guests. The atmosphere buzzed with expectation. After all, this was not just another social gathering. Tonight was meant to mark the official engagement of Christopher Hale, one of the most respected businessmen in the city, to the stunning Vanessa Crown. Every headline, every camera, every whisper of society's elite was tuned to this very moment. At the far end of the room, Christopher stood tall in his black tailored suit, shoulders squared, his expression unreadable. To most onlookers, he appeared the picture of composure. Yet beneath the polished exterior, his mind replayed the venomous words he had overheard days before, the words Vanessa had thrown at Elena. Cruel and dismissive, words that had cut deeper than Vanessa could have imagined. "You don't belong in this family." He could still hear them echoing in the corridor, echoing like a judgment he could never forget. Vanessa, radiant in an emerald gown that hugged her figure, soaked in the admiration of the crowd. She had perfected her smile for the cameras, her laughter for the donors, and her poise for the wealthy families seated near the front. She believed tonight would solidify her place beside Christopher, elevating her from admired socialite to future matriarch of the Hale estate. She didn't notice the tightness around Christopher's eyes or the way he held his champagne flute as though it were a shield instead of a prop. Seated at a small corner table, Elena Rivera watched quietly, her simple navy dress almost invisible among the glitter of designer gowns. She had not wanted to attend, but Christopher had insisted. "You are part of this household," he had told her firmly, and though her nerves trembled at the thought of standing among people who would never see her as more than a servant, she had come. Philalia, a little girl, sat beside her, wearing a pale yellow dress with ribbons in her hair, her hand clutching Elena's. "Don't leave me tonight," Lila whispered, her big brown eyes shining with worry. Elena had kissed her forehead gently. "I won't. Not tonight. Not ever." The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, his voice booming through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this joyous celebration. Tonight, we honor the union of Christopher Hale and Vanessa Crown, a partnership that promises not only love but the joining of two remarkable legacies." Applause rippled across the hall. Vanessa lifted her chin proudly, squeezing Christopher's arm, expecting him to glow with the same satisfaction. Christopher stepped forward when the applause faded. His voice was deep, calm, and carried the weight of a man who had made countless public speeches before. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Your presence means a great deal to me, to my family, and to the future I wish to build." His words seemed ordinary, yet those closest noticed the slight tremor beneath them, the hesitation of a man not entirely at peace. Vanessa leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "Smile, darling. This is our night." Her words dripped with ownership, a reminder of the role she was determined to claim. Christopher did not smile. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on Elena at the corner table, on Lila's small hand curled protectively around hers. And suddenly, clarity cut through him like lightning. What future could he possibly build if it meant allowing cruelty to thrive under his own roof? What legacy could he leave if his daughter grew up believing love was conditional, kindness dis— He placed his glass down with a decisive clink. "I must be honest," he began, his tone shifting, commanding silence across the room. "Tonight was meant to be a celebration, a declaration of a commitment I intended to make. But before I can continue, I owe you all, and myself, the truth." Confusion flickered across Vanessa's flawless face. She forced a nervous laugh. "Christopher, darling, perhaps save the speeches for later. Everyone is eager for a toast." But Christopher's voice grew sharper. "No, Vanessa, there will be no toast. There will be no engagement." Gasps tore through the audience. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the marble floor. Cameras flashed instantly, capturing the frozen moment as though it were a scene from a scandalous play. Vanessa stiffened, her nails digging into his arm, but he gently pulled away, leaving her clinging to air. "It can't be serious," she hissed under her breath, panic flashing in her eyes. "Don't humiliate me like this." But Christopher didn't falter. His gaze swept the crowd, steady and unyielding. "I cannot and will not bind my life to someone who disrespects the very people who make my home whole. A person who restores joy to my daughter deserves honor, not cruelty, and I will not raise Lila in a house poisoned by disdain for those who care for her." All eyes darted toward Alina, who sat frozen in her chair, her cheeks flushing scarlet. She wanted the ground to open and swallow her whole. The weight of so many eyes was unbearable. "They'll think I plotted this," she thought desperately. "They'll think I wanted this humiliation for Vanessa." Lila pressed closer against her side, her small voice trembling. "Alina, what's happening?" Elena forced a Vanessa, her pride unraveling in front of the city's most powerful families, snapped, "This is ridiculous. Do you hear yourselves? He's defending the nanny, a maid with no background, no standing. Do you truly believe she hasn't been manipulating you, Christopher? Look at her. She's playing the innocent, but we all know her type. She's using your daughter to worm her way into your life, and you're letting her succeed." The crowd erupted in murmurs, whispers weaving through the air like wildfire. Some were shocked, others intrigued, a few openly scandalized. Elena felt as though every word was a dagger. Her hands trembled, but she held Lila tighter, shielding the child as best she could from the storm. Christopher's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with fury. "Enough, Vanessa," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You've revealed exactly who you are, and nothing you say can erase that truth." Vanessa's emerald gown shimmered under the lights as she stepped closer, her face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," she spat. "You're throwing away a future every man in this room would envy. For a woman who doesn't belong in your world." She turned her glare toward Elena, venom dripping from her gaze. "Enjoy your triumph while it lasts, little girl." "It won't." Elena's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening under the weight of Vanessa's accusations. She wanted to deny them, to shout that she had never sought anything but Lila's happiness. But her voice refused to rise. The humiliation was suffocating. She glanced toward Christopher, desperate for guidance, but his eyes were already locked on Vanessa, unflinching. "Vanessa Crown," Christopher said, his voice like steel. "Our engagement is over." He spoke the words with a finality that silenced the room. A collective gasp rippled across the hall, louder than before, followed by a swell of whispers. For a moment, even Vanessa faltered, as though she couldn't believe he had dared to speak the words aloud. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You don't mean that. You can't." Her hands clutched at his arm, desperation replacing rage. "Think of what you're giving up. The partnerships, the influence, the image. You'll destroy everything you've worked for." Her voice cracked, revealing the fear beneath the polished exterior. Christopher gently pulled his arm free. "The only thing worth destroying," he said, his tone resolute, "is the illusion that wealth or influence can excuse cruelty. My daughter deserves a home filled with kindness. Elena has given her that when no one else could. And if protecting that makes me a fool in the eyes of society, then so be it." The words landed like thunder. A few guests nodded discreetly, their expressions softening, though many others exchanged scandalized glances. Reporters at the edge of the hall scribbled furiously into notepads, knowing tomorrow's headlines would explode across the city. "Millionaire breaks engagement. For his nanny?" Vanessa's face twisted, a storm of fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this humiliation, Christopher. I won't be made a fool in front of everyone." She stormed off, her heels clattering angrily against the marble floor, the train of her gown trailing like a green flame. The doors slammed behind her, leaving silence in her wake. For a moment, the ballroom felt suspended in breathless stillness. Then, slowly, the crowd began to buzz again, voices hushed but insistent. Every eye seemed to return to Alina, as if she held the key to the scandal unraveling before them. Alina wished she could vanish, her pulse raced, heat burning through her skin. "Christopher, please," she whispered, though her voice barely carried beyond Lila's ear. "Will ruin me. They'll say, I wanted this." Christopher stepped closer, his presence shielding her from the barrage of stares. "Let them say what they will," he murmured firmly. "I know the truth. Lila knows the truth. That's all that matters." His gaze softened as he looked down at his daughter, who clung fiercely to Elena's dress, tears brimming in her eyes. And most importantly, she knows who loves her. Lila buried her face against Elena's side, sobbing quietly. "Don't go, Elena. Don't let her take you away." Elena's heart broke at the child's fear. She stroked Lila's hair, whispering, "I'm not leaving you, not now, not ever." Christopher placed a steady hand on Lila's back, his voice gentle. "Shh, sweetheart, no one's taking her away. You have my word." His eyes met Elena's once more, and though the room around them brimmed with judgment and scandal, in that moment there was a quiet understanding between them. A bond forged not from desire or ambition, but from shared devotion to the little girl between them. But the storm was not over. Guests approached cautiously, their words laced with curiosity and skepticism. "Christopher, are you sure?" asked Damien, his longtime business partner, voice low but urgent. "This is going to cost you. Vanessa's family won't take this lightly." Christopher's answer was unwavering. "Let them not. I'll pay any price to protect my daughter from a loveless home." Damien studied him for a moment, then sighed, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You finally remembered what matters most." He nodded toward Elena. "Don't let the whispers break her. She doesn't deserve it." With that, Damien melted back into the crowd, leaving Christopher to shield Elena and Lila from the gathering storm. Photographers snapped their final shots before security ushered them out. The guests trickled away, some murmuring support, others shaking their heads. By the time the ballroom emptied, Elena felt drained, as though the weight of every stare had settled on her shoulders. She sat with Lila still in her arms, her dress wrinkled, her hair undone, but her heart beating with fierce determination. No matter what tomorrow's headlines would say, she knew her purpose, to protect the child who had become her world. Christopher approached quietly, his voice low but steady. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "For all of it, for the spectacle, for the way you were dragged into this, I should have stopped it sooner." Elena shook her head, her voice hoarse but firm. "You did what you had to do, but I fear what comes next. For you, for your name, and for me." Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "I never wanted this, Christopher. I never wanted to be the reason for anyone's downfall." Christopher's expression softened, his voice steady as a vow. "You're not the reason. You're the light in a house that was dark for too long. And if people can't see that, then that their blindness, not yours." His words wrapped around her like a promise, anchoring her as the night closed in. Lila stirred, lifting her head just enough to whisper, "Daddy, don't let Elena go." Christopher's gaze locked onto Elena's, a quiet resolve settling there. "I won't, Lila," he answered softly. "I won't." The fallout from the broken engagement spread faster than wildfire. By dawn the next day, tabloids had splashed the story across glossy covers and news feeds. Headlines screamed, "Millionaire CEO ends engagement in public. Is the nanny to blame?" Pundits debated, gossip columnists spursy with scandal brewing behind gilded doors. Cameras lingered outside the estate gates, reporters eager to capture even a glimpse of the man who had humiliated his fiancée in front of half the city's elite. Inside those walls, the air was heavy with silence. Elena carried herself carefully through the halls, conscious of the eyes that seemed to follow her even when no one was around. She knew how the story was being twisted. To the world she was the interloper, the quiet maid who had charmed her way into a child's heart, and worse, a powerful man's trust. She wasn't blind to how such tales ended, reputations ruined, lives uprooted, children caught in the middle. She folded clothes slowly into a small suitcase laid out on the bed in her modest room. The fabric of her few dresses was thin from years of wear, the colors faded. Each garment was folded with trembling hands, as though the act of leaving required her to steady her heart with each crease. Elena had always known her place, and she feared she had already stayed too long. But when the door creaked, she turned to see Lila standing there, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were wide, glistening with confusion and dread. "Are you leaving me?" Lila's voice cracked with the rawness of a child's worst fear. Elena sank to her knees, gathering Lila into her arms. The girl's small frame trembled, and Elena pressed her cheek against her hair. "Sweetheart, I don't want it, but people are saying things that might hurt your father." Lila pulled back, her tears streaking her cheeks, and shook her head stubbornly. "I don't care what they say. They don't know. You made me laugh again, Elena. You held me when I had nightmares. You can go—" Her words, so innocent yet piercing, drove into Elena's chest like a blade. She kissed the crown of Lila's head, whispering, "I promised I'd never leave you, and I meant it." But inside, the storm of doubt still raged. Could she truly stay, knowing the entire world painted her as the villain? That storm outside mirrored the one within. Rain lashed against the windows, the sky flashing with the anger of lightning. When Elena stepped into the garden later that evening, she carried the half-packed suitcase with her. The drizzle quickly turned to a downpour, plastering her dress to her skin, soaking her hair until strands clung to her face. She needed air, space, something beyond the suffocating whispers of scandal. She didn't expect Christopher to find her there. Yet there he stood, framed by the French doors of the terrace, his tailored shirt damp, his jaw tight with something unspoken. Slowly, he walked toward her, the rain swallowing the silence between them. "Helene," he said, his voice almost breaking against the storm, "why is your suitcase out?" Her throat tightened. She couldn't lie. "Because I don't belong here. Because the world thinks I ruined everything. I can't be the reason your reputation is dragged through the mud." Christopher's eyes flashed with both pain and defiance. He closed the distance until the rain running from his brow mingled with hers. "Do you think I care about what the world whispers?" he demanded. "Do you think headlines matter more than the truth?" Elena dropped her gaze, her fingers tightening around the handle of the suitcase. "You lost an engagement because of me. Vanessa will never stop spreading her version of the story. And what will people say of you? That you traded a woman of wealth and status for a maid who had no place at your table." The words were sharp, but they weren't meant to wound him. They were meant to remind herself of the gulf between them. Yet Christopher only exhaled, as though the weight of her fear broke something in him too. "Do you think this is about status?" he asked softly, his tone cutting through the rain like steel beneath velvet. "Elena, you gave my daughter back her childhood. Before you, she was fading in silence. Now she laughs, she plays, she dreams again. You didn't ruin anything, you restored everything that mattered." The confession rang louder than the thunder. Elena's chest heaved, her tears mixing with the rain. She shook her head. "But I'm not enough, Christopher. I wasn't born into your world. I don't know how to walk in it without stumbling. I'm just—" He caught her hands in his grip firm, unwavering. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't you dare belittle the very person who brought life back into this house." His voice cracked with the force of emotion. "I don't want perfection. I don't want status. I want love, laughter, and truth. And that's what you give us." Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither moved. The storm howled, lightning carved silver across the sky, and the world seemed to wait. Elena searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, but found only raw, unshaken certainty. "Christopher," she whispered, her voice trembling, as though the syllables might shatter. "I'm so afraid that I'll lose you, that I'll lose her. Afraid that this moment will break apart tomorrow." His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away the rain, though more kept falling. "Then let's not think of tomorrow," he said. "Let's think of now. And right now, I'm standing in the storm because I can't let you walk away." Her suitcase slipped from her hand, forgotten in the grass. And when his lips met hers, it was not the kiss of a man bound by duty or desire. It was the desperate, unguarded confession of someone who had already given his heart. The rain soaked them, the wind wrapped around them, but none of it mattered. The kiss was fierce, unrelenting, a promise that no headline, no scandal, no whispered rumor could erase. From the upstairs window, Lila pressed her little hands against the glass, her face glowing with wonder. She didn't understand the world's cruelty, but she understood love. She saw it in the way Elena's body softened into her father's arms, in the way his embrace shielded her even from the storm itself. And she smiled, whispering to her stuffed rabbit, "They're not leaving me, not—" The storm had not yet passed, but something inside the garden shifted. The lightning faded to distant flashes, the thunder softened to rumbles, as though even the sky had chosen to listen. Elena's heart pounded wildly as she stepped back from Christopher, her breath uneven, her lips trembling from the intensity of the kiss. "This isn't right," she murmured, though her voice betrayed her conviction. "You're vulnerable, Christopher. You've just ended an engagement that bound two powerful families. People will say, I'm the reason, that I've manipulated you." Christopher's jaw tightened, but his eyes never wavered. "Let them talk. Let them print their lies. I know the truth. And so do you." Her chest ached. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that truth could stand taller than the tide of scandal, but her past whispered otherwise. She had grown up watching how easily the powerful crushed the powerless. She had felt it herself, the sting of being dismissed, of being told she was only a maid. "Christopher," she said carefully, "you don't understand. Your world isn't kind to people like me. Even if you don't care what they say, it doesn't mean their words won't cut. It doesn't mean Lila won't hear them one day." At the mention of his daughter, Christopher's expression softened. He took Elena's hands again, pressing them against his chest where his heart thundered. "Lila already knows what matters. She knows you love her, and she loves you back. That's more powerful than anything they'll ever write." Elena's resolve wavered, her tears threatening again, but she couldn't stop the smile that touched her lips when he said it. The rain eased to a drizzle, and they stood in the damp garden, their breaths mingling in the cool night. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena allowed herself to feel hope. Not borrowed hope from Lila's laughter, not cautious hope hidden beneath her humility, but her own. Still, the weight of reality pressed at the edges. "What if Vanessa doesn't stop?" she asked softly. She asked, "Come back, angrier than ever. She'll spread poison into every ear that listens. She'll make sure I'm hated." Christopher's eyes hardened at the thought, the businessman in him sparking with resolve. "Then let her try. She underestimates me, and she underestimates you. Together, Elena, we can withstand anything." The word together hung between them, rich and full of promise. Elena's pulse quickened at its sound. She had never imagined her life tied to someone like him. Never dared dream it. Yet here he was, offering it, not with arrogance but with sincerity. From the terrace, a soft voice interrupted. "Daddy?" Both turned to see Lila, barefoot, her little nightgown brushing against her knees. She had slipped from her window and patted down quietly, drawn by the storm's quiet lull. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear, but with hope. Christopher bent down, scooping her into his arms. The child rested her head against his shoulder, still gazing at Elena. "I don't want her to go," Lila whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Can she stay, Daddy? Forever?" Elena's heart clenched. She had heard many pleas in her life, but none like this. None so fragile, so pure. She covered her mouth with her hand to stifle the sob that rose. Christopher looked at her over Lila's small head, his eyes deep with a silent question. And for once, Elena did not look away. She nodded faintly, her tears now warm with something different. They carried Lila back inside, together. The mansion that had once felt heavy with wealth and silence now felt different, alive with a fragile, flickering light. Later, after Lila had drifted to sleep, Christopher lingered in the hallway outside her room. Elena tucked the child in, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead, whispering a lullaby she remembered from her own mother. She kissed the girl's cheek gently before standing. When she stepped out, Christopher was there, leaning against the wall. His eyes found hers immediately. "You're not leaving," he said quietly, firmly, as though it were already decided. Elena's lips parted, but no protest came. The storm had tested them, the kiss had bound them, and Lila's plea had sealed it. She wasn't leaving. Not tomorrow, not tomorrow. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she belonged. The days following the stormy night in the garden were filled with whispers that seemed to echo louder than the thunder had. Newspapers and glossy magazines printed headlines that made Elena's hands tremble when she saw them at the corner store. The Billionaire and the Nanny, from boardrooms to backstairs, Christopher Blackwood's shocking choice. Some articles painted her as a schemer, others as a pitiful servant reaching beyond her plate. No matter the angle, the message was the same: she did not belong. At the mansion, silence sometimes weighed as heavily as the laughter of society's ridicule outside. The staff, loyal and kind, tried to shield her, but Elena could see the pity in their eyes when she passed. Even when she smiled for Lila, her heart twisted at the thought of what Christopher was sacrificing. He had defended her once, publicly, but what about now that the world marked? Would he tire of fighting battles on her behalf? Christopher, however, stood unshaken. At a charity gala only a week later, where Elena had begged not to be seen, he placed his hand at the small of her back and guided her into the glittering ballroom. Gasps spread like wildfire. The chandelier light seemed to focus on them, every eye sharp as daggers, yet Christopher's voice carried with a calm authority when someone asked where Vanessa was. "My engagement is broken," he said, without flinching. Then, with a glance at Elena, he added, "I have no regrets. My daughter's joy is what matters, and the one who gave it back to her is by my side." The silence that followed was deafening. Some sneered, others clapped politely, but Elena's cheeks burned as if she stood under the sun itself. She lowered her gaze, fingers trembling against the clutch she held. Christopher squeezed her hand firmly, grounding her in his certainty. For the first time, she realized that the man beside her was not ashamed, he was proud. But pride in his eyes could not erase the sting of whispered cruelty. In the marketplace, two women in pearls whispered loudly enough for her to hear. A nanny playing lady? Imagine the scandal at his table. Elena gripped her basket tighter, forcing herself to walk past without flinching. Later in the nursery, she hid her tears behind a smile as Lila wrapped her arms around her waist. It was Lila who broke the fragile barrier one evening. They were in the drawing room, Christopher reading by the fire, Elena stitching a small dress for Lila's doll. The child looked up, her innocent eyes glowing with certainty. "Mama," she said softly, holding the doll out for Elena to dress. The word froze the air. Elena's needle slipped from her fingers, her chest tightening. She dared not look at Christopher, afraid of what expression might cross his face. But when she finally turned, she saw not shock or anger, but tears glistening in his eyes. His book had slipped from his hands, forgotten. "Say it again, sweetheart," Christopher whispered, his voice raw. "Mama," Lila repeated, pressing her cheek against Elena's arm. "She's my mama now." Elena's throat closed, her vision blurring. She wanted to protest, to remind Delilah she was only a nanny, but the child's love was pure, unshaken by the labels the world hurled. Christopher knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both. "She's family," he said firmly. "Our family." In that moment, the mansion seemed to change. The walls that had long echoed with silence began to carry laughter again. Dinner became a place of warmth where Christopher listened to Leela's endless stories while Elena tried to keep a straight face at her exaggerations. Hallways once cold with marble now felt alive with footsteps and music. Even the staff smiled more, whispering that the house finally felt like a home again. Still, Elena battled her doubts in private. In her small room, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, whispering, "What if I'm not enough? What if the world breaks him because of me?" Yet the next morning, Christopher would find her in the garden or library, sit beside her, and say words that cut through every fear. "This is our family, Elena," he told her one afternoon, his hand closing over hers with quiet strength. "Not the world's to judge. They may whisper, they may laugh, but they don't sit at our table. They don't hear Lila's laughter. They don't know the way she looks at you. That is what matters. Not them, us." His certainty steadied her heart in ways nothing else could. With each day, Elena began to believe that perhaps love was stronger than scorn. Perhaps she could walk into a room, not with fear of what society thought, but with pride for the family they were building together. And though whispers still chased them beyond the gates, within those walls, Elena discovered something she had never dared to dream: belonging. The sun spilled golden light across the wide lawns of the Whitmore estate, casting long shadows from the blooming cherry trees that lined the garden path. Spring had returned in full splendor, carrying with it a sense of renewal that touched every corner of the once silent mansion. Laughter rang out like music, sharp and bright, echoing through the open windows. For the first time in years, Christopher felt the air around him alive, pulsing with something more than just wealth or duty. It was filled with joy, an unfamiliar but welcome companion. Lila darted across the grass, her little feet kicking off her shoes as she chased a butterfly with all the abandon of a child who had forgotten fear. Her long dark hair streamed behind her, no longer hiding her face in shyness. Every so often, she threw back her head and laughed, the sound rising and mingling with the whisper of the trees. Alina stood a few feet away, her eyes shining as she watched the child she had once found broken and withdrawn, now running like sunlight. Christopher lingered by Elena's side, his hands clasped behind his back, but his heart restless. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, but the sight before him, Lila's free spirit, Elena's quiet radiance, was more than rehearsal. It was life, real and fragile, waiting for him to anchor it. He drew a slow breath, steadying the weight of what he was about to do. "Look at her," Elena whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Do you remember the first day? She wouldn't even step off the rug." Christopher nodded. "I remember. She wouldn't look at me either. I thought I had lost her forever." Elena turned her face toward him, sunlight catching on the gentle curve of her cheek. "And now?" His throat tightened. He could have spoken about progress, about therapists and patience, about time doing its quiet work. But none of those words were true enough. Instead, he answered softly, "Now she's home. Because of you." Elena's lips parted, and he saw tears gather in her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. She shook her head as if to deflect the praise, but Christopher wasn't finished. His fingers brushed against the inside pocket of his jacket, where a small velvet box waited, burning against him like a secret. Lila ran back toward them, breathless and flushed, her hands cupped around nothing at all. The butterfly had escaped, but her joy had not dimmed. She flung herself at Elena first, wrapping her arms around her waist, then tilted her face up with sparkling eyes. "Mama, did you see me run?" The word, "Mama," still had the power to undo Christopher. Elena froze for a second, as if the sound might shatter her, then bent low to gather Lila into her arms. Her voice trembled as she said, "Yes, my love. You ran like the wind." Christopher swallowed hard. That one word, "Mama," was more sacred than any vow spoken in a cathedral. Lila had chosen Elena not just as caretaker, not just as friend, but as mother. And if Christopher had any doubts about what he was about to do, they vanished in that instant. He stepped forward, the grass soft beneath his shoes, and cleared his throat. "Lila," he said gently. She turned, still cradled against Elena's side, her eyes bright. "Yes, Daddy?" Another word that pierced him. Daddy. After years of silence and distance, she'd claimed him again. He dropped to one knee in the soft grass, the weight of his heart pressing heavier than any empire he had ever built. "I have something for you both," he said, his voice low, steady, but trembling at the edges. From his pocket, he drew the velvet box and opened it, revealing not just one ring, but two. Delicate bands nestled together, one sized for Elena, one for a child's small hand. Gasps of breath caught in Elena's throat, and even Lila leaned closer, her mouth forming a perfect... Christopher's gaze swept from his daughter to the woman who had saved them both. "Elena," he began, then faltered because words seemed too fragile for the truth he carried. He steadied himself, forcing his heart to speak. "You came into our lives when everything was dark. You gave my daughter her laughter back. You gave me hope when I thought I had none. No wealth, no power, no mansion could ever equal what you've given us." Elena shook her head, tears falling freely now. Christopher... But he raised a hand, not to silence her, but to finish the vow forming in his soul. "So I'm not asking you only to be my wife. I'm asking you to be our family. Will you, Elena, let us be a family again?" He turned to Lila, who reached for the smaller ring with trembling fingers. "And you, Lila, will you let Elena and me be your mom and dad, for real, forever?" For a moment, time stood still. The garden hushed, the birds quiet, as though the world itself held its breath. Elena's tears streamed down her face as Lila looked from the ring to Elena, then to Christopher. Slowly, with the clarity of a child's heart, she nodded. Lila cried, her voice breaking. "Yes, I want that. Mama and Daddy, together." She threw her arms around both of them, nearly knocking the box from Christopher's hands. Elena cradled her close, sobbing softly. I never dreamed of this kind of love." Christopher slipped the ring onto Elena's hand, then carefully slid the smaller one onto Lila's finger. Both of them glistened in the sun, but it wasn't the diamonds that shone. It was the bond. The three of them folded into an embrace, kneeling on the grass as if before an altar. Above them, the cherry blossoms trembled in the breeze, petals drifting down like blessings from heaven. The mansion loomed behind them, but it no longer looked cold. Its windows reflected laughter, its doors open, its halls alive. Christopher whispered into Elena's hair, his voice thick. "This is forever, our forever." And for the first time, Elena let herself believe it. The days that followed seemed touched by an unspoken grace. The household staff, once cautious and formal, moved with new warmth, smiles breaking easily as they passed the family in the hallways. Word of Christopher's proposal had spread quickly through the estate, but unlike the whispers of society's elite, here it was met with joy, with tears of genuine relief. The mansion felt like a living thing awakened from slumber, rooms once hushed now filled with light and laughter. Elena adjusted quickly, though her heart still stumbled at the sound of Lila's voice calling her mom. Each time the child said it, it sent ripples through her chest, both joy and disbelief mingling until she could scarcely breathe. Yet Lila said it more often now, as if savoring the right to claim her openly, proudly, without fear of losing her again. One afternoon, as Christopher worked in his study, Elena found herself in the garden with Lila, teaching her how to braid daisy crowns. The girl's small fingers fumbled with the stems, but her determination shone brighter than skill. Finally, she set the crooked circle on Elena's head and clapped her hands. "Now you're really a queen, Mama." Elena laughed through her tears, pulling Lila into her lap. "If I'm the queen, then what are you?" "Empresses," Lila said matter-of-factly. "And Daddy's the king. And this is our castle." Elena looked back toward the mansion, once so intimidating, and for the first time, she agreed. It wasn't the walls or chandeliers that made it a castle. It was the family within. Christopher joined them later, his tie loosened, the weight of meetings and business cast aside the moment he saw them. He knelt on the grass, brushing a kiss against Lila's forehead before pressing one to Elena's hand. "My queen and my princess conspiring against me?" he teased. Lila giggled. "We're decorating the castle. You can help too." And so he did, weaving clumsy braids of daisies until his large fingers tangled hopelessly. Elena's laughter rang out, free and unguarded, and Christopher watched her as if the sun itself had chosen her face to shine from. But beneath the laughter, there was a solemnity building in Christopher's heart. Later that evening, when Lila had drifted off to sleep, clutching her flower crown, he found Elena by the balcony, her hair caught in the moonlight. He slid his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you know," he murmured, "that you've given me more than I ever dared ask?" Nira laughed. Elena shook her head, leaning back against him. "I've given you nothing you didn't already have. You just needed someone to remind you," he said, firmly turning her to face him. "I had wealth, I had status, but those things were empty. You gave me life again. You gave me a family." Her eyes shimmered as he kissed her, slow and reverent, sealing the promise he had spoken in the garden. This was not a love born of convenience, not a partnership forged in duty. It was real, tested by storms, purified by truth. The seasons shifted, carrying them toward a summer bright with joy. On one sun-drenched afternoon, the family gathered once more beneath the blooming trees where Christopher had first asked Elena to stay forever. Layla ran ahead with a basket of roses, scattering petals in her path. Elena followed in a simple dress, her hand entwined with Christopher's, her heart steady now in the place she once. Friends and family from both sides filled the garden, their faces softened by smiles. This was no grand society ball, no spectacle for the newspapers. It was intimate, filled with love. Christopher stood before them all, holding Elena's hand as though it were his lifeline, and spoke vows that came not from tradition, but from the depths of his soul. "I once thought power made me strong," he confessed, his voice carrying across the garden. "But true strength is this, loving without fear, choosing without pride, living without myself. Elena, you gave me back my daughter, and in doing so, you gave me back my heart. Today I give it to you, forever." Tears streamed down Elena's cheeks as she echoed his vow in her own words, promising not perfection, but devotion, not grandeur, but truth. Lila stood between them, clutching both their hands as though binding them herself. When Christopher kissed Elena as his wife, the crowd erupted in applause, but all he heard was Lila's clear voice shouting, "Mama! Daddy!" The three embraced once more, laughter spilling out, mingling with the cheers, the petals, the sunlight. And so, beneath the wide sky, the family was reborn, not by wealth, not by name, but by love.